Hi, Joyce at Delightful Quilting and Sewing, an Olting dealer in Avon, New York, with an update on my mother-in-law's quilt, which you can see here is finished. The quilting is finished on it, and I just wanted to show you a few more things about the quilt. So I'm going to lay it over the frame. And we're going to start over here because I wanted to show you what my mother-in-law used for the inside batting on this quilt. Now, remember, this was made in, give or take, around the 1940s, early 1940s. And I give my mother-in-law a lot of credit. Every quilt has a story, and I'd love to know more about the story of this quilt. This is a double wedding ring quilt, and double wedding rings are not for the faint of heart. I have 3 double wedding rings, well actually 2. This one goes back to my sister-in-law. And as I look at the construction of these, they were a challenge. This was my mother-in-law's first quilt that she made. And these little patches that are in the pickle dish that we call here around the melon, the construction, as I noticed that she put this together with, this background piece right here was just rough cut. And these were laid on top and overcast, stitched, top stitched down to that. And then this melon piece was top stitched on top of the pickle dish. And then these were stitched in here, and this was all hand done. And I give a lot of credit to anybody, whether you're using a machine for stitching these things or whether you're doing it by hand. This is a challenge because you're working with pieces that are cut with bias edges, lots of places for stretching to happen, which it did in this quilt. It's not perfectly square by any means, but it isn't terrible either. Now, there's some things that are not quite how you normally would do this. Normally these pickle dishes would come into the seam right here, but she's consistent throughout the quilt with the way that she did her construction technique here. And it looks way nicer than it did before. So this was what was inside, and you're kind of wondering probably what this is. These are just flannel sheets that were used to be the batting inside of the quilt. Kind of interesting, but it's what she had. This was what was used for backing, a piece of fabric. Red was her favorite color, so I'm not surprised. This was the backing that she used, and my sister-in-law and I decided to use this for the binding on the quilt. Now, the interesting thing in the construction of this was, and I pinned this back on, the corners had this area jutted out here, this little square area. And when you look at the backing and the batting blankets that she used there, you can see this. They have these funny little square corners sticking out around the quilt. And then in places where we would normally have this inset like this was sticking out. So if you look over here, you can see those areas on here. So there's one of those little triangles sticking out. Here is the square for the corner sticking out. So it looked kind of odd. And she just layered these things, this in the middle, the backing and the top, and she sewed the 3 together, flipped it right side out, and that's the way this quilt lived. Although nobody ever saw this quilt until my sister-in-law discovered it one day when she was with Mother. So what we did was we took it apart. I removed these funky little corners, these little things like this, and took them off completely so that it looks more like how we would normally see a quilt of this style today. So those are the corners and the inset areas all the way around the quilt. I just turned this back because my sister-in-law Donna is going to be the one that will be doing the hand stitching on the binding, but you can see how this is going to look when it's totally finished. I used a Quilter's Dream 100% cotton batting in the quilt, and this is what the backing looks like. I found this backing at a quilt show. One of the vendors had vintage reproduction fabrics. This one is not really a 30s fabric, more like into the 40s. And I used those funny little patches that came off of the corners and those inset areas to make the label to put on the quilt. One of the very interesting things that I find about quilts, especially, well, any quilts really, today's quilts or vintage quilts like this, is every quilt has a story. And it would be interesting to know what the maker's story is behind this, but of course we can't because mother passed away in 2012. But I wanted to show you very interesting patches on here. You can see it right here. If you look closely at that, you'll see that these are airplanes, bombers of World War II vintage, flying in formation. And this fabric is in several places, about 4 or 5 places on this quilt. There's one here in red and blue. And if we go up here a little farther, we can see one with red airplanes in it, and I thought it was 2 colorways of this fabric, but then I found one other patch, which I can't find right now, that is blue, but in one corner you see a little bit of red, so it's probably just one fabric. I have a friend who is a quilt appraiser and quilt historian, and so I sent her a picture of that and asked her, what do you think on this? And she's going like, oh my gosh, look at this. And I said, what do you think it is? And she said, well, patriotic types of fabrics like that we began to see around 1940. And although she looked in her book, she didn't find this particular fabric. So we're kind of dating this quilt around 1940, early 1940s, based on fabrics, and especially that particular one, because it can't be older than the newest fabric that we find in here. And there's certainly some 1940s fabrics in this quilt, and there's 1930s fabrics in this quilt. So just where it falls, I don't know. I know that my mother-in-law married in 1942. They had a farm, and I know she helped on the farm, and she was also an elementary teacher for a time, and then they had their family. So she probably didn't have much time after she got married to work on anything like this. So I'm expecting she probably did this before she was married, maybe even started it when she was in college. So interesting quilt, and something that was fun for me to be a part of. And it will be packaged up in a little while and on its way to my sister-in-law in Indiana. When she gets it, she's going to finish the binding on it and enjoy being able to use this quilt that my mother-in-law had put away because it wasn't good enough. And I would hope that she would be proud of this quilt today if she saw it. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.